In case you're wondering, yes, that song from Grease is still stuck in my head. Thanks for asking. Welcome back to Storytime. Up today is a discussion of Captain America, the First Avenger, the reboot of the 1990 film, the reboot of the 1979 film, the reboot of the 1944 film.
High fastening pants.
It's a movie about a simpler time when all you needed to win a world war was to let a guy on steroids who was incapable of taking orders pursue his own interests. As always, we're going deep, and if you can't tell from the title or my tone, I really hate this movie, so if you can't handle that,
leave now and never come back.
Captain America, the First Avenger is a 2011 film directed by Joe Johnston, who prior to this directed such classic films as Honey, I Shrunk the Kids and Jumanji. And also this.
Oh my God!
Before all that, he was a VFX art director at ILM on the original Star Wars trilogy and Raiders of the Lost Ark, which completely fails to explain why so much of this movie looks like a bad cartoon. The movie was written by these guys, the writing partnership that brought us 3 Chronicles of Narnia movies, Pain and Gain, and heaven help us, all of these. I'm sorry.
Come on!
I'm sorry, I can't.
Come on!
This is who you picked to write the...
Come on!
Like the big final movies in your series. Come on.
Okay. So should
The movie itself is about Steve Rogers, a self-professed kid from Brooklyn, so sickly that he is denied entry into the U.S. Army during World War II and ignored by all women everywhere. That is, until he is selected for a super-secret soldier program, after which he becomes a big, strong guy who goes around Europe kicking butt and who all women love. The movie wants desperately to be a throwback war film full of patriotic fervor and kick-buttingness, but it's not. I thought I'd throw my hat into the Jeopardy hosting ring while we're here. Ready, players? Answer. What we know about our protagonist, Steve.
What is not a damn thing?
Okay, so that's not entirely true, but Steve is catastrophically undercharacterized, and it is embarrassing and insulting to watch. Here is what we know. His name is Steve, he is from Brooklyn, he is a human male, he is sickly, and his parents have been dead for some time, both having suffered gruesome or painful combat or service-related deaths. This is the extent of any backstory we get. Ever. In terms of characterization, we know that he is determined or stubborn and doesn't like bullies, which in this movie means anyone doing something he doesn't like. We don't know how old he is, whether he has other family, what he does for a living, where, how, and with whom he lives, what his interests are, how long and from where he knows Bucky. We do know what he wants, which is to enlist, and we know why, because he doesn't like bullies, and also because he has kind of like this Lieutenant Dan dying in combat complex. Over the course of the movie, we also learn that Steve has an America-sized chip on his shoulder, is extraordinarily vainglorious, and has precisely no regard for authority of any kind. But the movie doesn't know about all that stuff, so it doesn't count as characterization. We'll circle back. Peggy is an agent with SSR, which I assume isn't affiliated with the USSR, but the movie never tells us what the abbreviation is, so I can't be sure. She is British, can shoot good, and develops a thing for Steve that starts out as pity but develops into sweet love after he gets swole. See kids, size does matter. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Barnes is Steve's normal-sized friend who does enlist in Army, somehow as a sergeant. He gets captured by Hydra in Italy, is rescued by Steve, and is then conscripted into Steve's secret strike team.
Milhouse, you and me will be Omega Team. Todd, you and Data are Team Strike Force. Nelson, that leaves you and Martin. Team Discovery Channel!
He falls to his death from a fantasy train. John is the Nazi man in charge of Hydra, the made-up weapons division of Hitler's Nazi party. He is obsessed with the occult and utilizes the blue Tesseract cube to create fantasy laser guns. He has also had the same steroid serum as Steve, which turned him into a red demon man because he's evil at heart or something. We also have various science guys, including German science guy, other German science guy, and young Howard Stark. A whole new gang of stereotype fighters, including heavily armed black guy, tech-savvy Asian guy, dandyish British guy, short, quirky French guy, and bowler-wearing Boston Irish guy. And also Tommy Lee Jones. Obviously, we aren't painting with a super complex palette here, which isn't inherently a problem. For one, it's a comic book movie. For another, it's a war movie. It's not like we're expecting Howard's End or something. And as we've seen, having a roster of one-dimensional supporting characters isn't an immediate death stroke to your comic book movie, though it certainly doesn't help. And honestly, in this movie, I don't even care. Hugo Weaving gives a charismatic enough performance that the red guy is at least interesting to watch, and Tommy Lee Jones has some nice Tommy Lee Jones moments. The problem lies squarely with our protagonist, Steve, and the problem is he can't grow and is awful. Remember about plot. Basically, plot is the stuff that happens in a story. It is the sum of the characters' desires and actions and their resulting consequences. Generally, the bulk of a plot is a character or characters working toward one or more goals, like robbing a casino. Sometimes the goals change as character desires shift, either because one goal has been accomplished or something about the situation changes, like fleeing from and then returning to the Citadel. The plot becomes more complicated as the characters experience more conflict, either externally from other characters or the situation, or internally within themselves, and it becomes more urgent and tense as the stakes are raised, what they have to lose. As the plot runs its course, the characters grow and develop, learning from their decisions and experiences. Sometimes this growth is positive, like becoming a hero. Other times it is negative, like becoming a villain. Often it is more subtle than that, something like developing trust or an emotional connection with other people or losing it.
My name is Max.
One of the big problems about Captain America, the First Avenger, is that Steve, our main character, experiences no growth or change whatsoever. Therefore, the plot, such as it is irrelevant. The only problem Steve has to overcome in this movie has to do with his physical body. He is too shrimpy to do the things he wants to do. And the movie provides no paths for growth to overcome this obstacle. We don't see Steve developing any skills, ever, or finding alternative ways of achieving his desires. For example, we don't see him, say, trying to work at Stark Industries to develop war technology or trying to do anything on the home front. Like, he could be George Baileying it out there as an air raid warden or volunteering with the Red Cross or something. In fact, Steve openly scoffs at these actions, evidently thinking them below him. Definitely something a true patriot would do.
But Donner said, "No, this is man's work."
The movie pretends to develop Steve this way when German scientist number 1 selects him for the project. In a training montage, we see him being determined or stubborn and using his head brain to solve a problem. This is not development, though. We already know Steve is determined or stubborn, and we also learn very quickly that he has already been chosen for the experiment anyway, so what he does doesn't matter. The result is that Steve's main problem is overcome within the first 30 minutes of the movie through precisely no effort of his own. This means that his new body is not a piece of character development. It is not something he worked for or earned. The qualities that get him the body, his gumption and perceived selflessness, were things he already had and did not develop at boot camp, making the new body more of an entitlement. It is his due, which in itself isn't necessarily an issue. The ensuing plot could be Steve experiencing conflict resulting from the opportunities the new body creates. But it's not. I mean, it wants to be and probably thinks it is, but it's not.
Not bread, you get it? Huh? You see?
What it is Steve doing whatever he wants all the time because he can and because nobody can stop him now, which makes him a hero even though what he does is, shall we say, problematic. This begins immediately. When the Hydra guy shoots Science Man number 1 and breaks out of the building in New York, Steve follows after him, actually helping facilitate his escape when he tackles Agent Carter instead of letting her take the shot she was demonstrably capable of making. This needlessly imperils civilian lives, including a child hostage, and ultimately results in the damage of a lot of private property and the destruction of the serum. Steve does this because he wants to, not because he is ordered to, and because he feels he can do it best despite having never pursued a fleeing culprit or engaged successfully in any sort of fisticuffs. I don't know, I guess the serum taught him how to fight too, I don't know. When he gets back, Tommy Lee Jones says Steve has to go to Alamogordo for testing, since he is the result of a unique military experiment, a thing he most certainly would have known about and is reasonable. He doesn't like this because it doesn't appeal to his vanity. And instead chooses to go on a PR tour with the senator. A thing he can just do, apparently. This satisfies his vanity and allows him to be a hero through the show business until he goes overseas on a USO tour where he is heckled by actual soldiers it is clear he knows nothing about. Here is where things start to go off the rails. Steve learns that most of Bucky's division has been killed or captured by Hydra, which is also apparently now a combat arm of Hitler's Nazi party. Upon being told that no rescue operation is being planned due to its high risk, Steve abandons his post without authorization, desertion, to rescue them himself, notwithstanding the fact that he has never engaged in combat before, has no knowledge of the layout of the Hydra compound or the surrounding landscape, and has no experience or training in infiltrating an active enemy base. He does it because he wants to, not because he is ordered to, and because he feels he can do it best. Further, he endangers a civilian who plays a significant and likely irreplaceable role in the Allied war effort. When he gets back, he piously surrenders himself for discipline, but of course is let off since he brought the guys back. Nothing is made of the fact that by deserting and risking his own capture, Steve was jeopardizing not only the important symbol he had become to millions of people back home, but also potential intelligence he may have had regarding SSR. Instead, he is made full captain and given command over an elite strike force, even though he has no demonstrable knowledge of military tactics, has not been in a leadership position before, and has a clear disdain for chain of command. Now, the fact that Steve doesn't like being told what to do, has a monstrous ego he conceals with the shroud of sanctimoniousness, and always chooses unthinking violence rather than other options, isn't necessarily a problem. In fact, it could actually make for a really compelling movie. If indeed Captain America is a symbol for America and all it means, and possesses these qualities, we have the possibility for real character development in him as he works to overcome these flaws, as well as meaningful and interesting commentary about our country. But the movie doesn't know it's characterized Steve in this way. And the reason I know that is it goes out of its way to show he is a hero at all times. We already saw this with freeing the prisoners. On the one hand, yes, it's a good thing to do. On the other, unacceptable given his position. Steve is acting like a sovereign entity unto himself, not a member of the military with a specific role to play. He embarks on this mission to save his friend, but also because he doesn't think his role is glorious enough and he feels he is entitled to more. Not only do his actions risk what Captain America stands for in the war effort, but it also undermines Tommy Lee Jones' actual authority and credibility as a general. The next time he chooses a course of action, people might wonder if it is the best choice. Clearly he was wrong about not going after the prisoners, so what about now? This is a major issue, but the movie plays Steve's choice as unambiguously heroic. It does this with everything Steve ever does. The movie doesn't permit him to make a mistake, so he has nothing to reflect on or overcome. Having to deal with seriously overstepping his bounds like this might be an opportunity for growth. He understands his own power and abilities, but now sees the importance of working as a team. Another perfect opportunity is with the death of Bucky, but it is also missed. As it is, his death is the result of bad luck more than anything else. The train is blown open and he is thrown outside by the blast of the laser gun, then the damaged railing he is holding onto fails. The result of the mission is a success. Science Man number 2 is captured and they are able to learn the location of the last Hydra base. Sad, of course, but not a failure, and ultimately not a moment of growth for Steve. He carries on exactly the same way, taking his glory run into the base and letting the grunts clean up like normal. But it didn't have to be that way. The mission could very easily have been used to help Steve grow as a character. If, for example, he had been ordered not to pursue it but did anyway, or Bucky had given an alternative idea Steve didn't listen to, or it was based on faulty intelligence Steve had acquired, maybe even being a trap. Anything to let him learn anything. Instead, we get a moment of sadness and then move on to the next thing. Bucky comes back in the next one anyway, so it doesn't matter. The problem from a story perspective is that Steve receives no meaningful pushback or consequences for his actions. Therefore, he cannot grow as a character. The story accepts at face value everything he does, indulging in hero worship at the cost of conflict and growth. It's self-gratifying fan fiction. For whom, you ask?
Se alguém quer vir pro samba, olha a roda como a fé.
Did you know that American law enforcement agencies and the armed services have a problem with current and former members belonging to extremist groups that advocate the use of violence and anarchy to meet their goals? If their members were mostly non-white or they came from a country we didn't care for, we'd call them gangs or terrorist groups, but since they don't, they're just extremists. Anyway, Captain America increasingly reads like fanfiction for and by these people. I guess I should get this out of the way. The term fanfiction isn't one of value judgment. It just means something that was written by a fan of a thing. It doesn't have aspirations of grandeur, it's just a fun exercise of the imagination. If you write or enjoy reading fan fiction, I'm not saying you're bad. It's fine. Mostly. As we've discussed, the issue I'm having with Captain America is that he is portrayed as an unconditional hero. Nothing that he does is wrong, and everything that he undertakes is successful. He knows implicitly when to play by the rules, when to go his own way, and he is always right. This makes being a leader his obvious birthright. The movie goes out of its way to tell us that all of this is because of his goodness. If not for that, he would only be another red guy. But here's the thing. Red Guy is right when he says that he and Captain America are the same. They are the same in that Steve cannot handle it when somebody does anything that is not his idea or tries to tell him what to do. In this movie, it is fairly benign. By the end of the series, this will metastasize into full-blown conspiratorial thinking, starting his own terror group to facilitate his own objectives, and possibly screwing with the universe's timeline so he can go see his old crush. Steve and Red Guy both believe in the implicit rightness of their cause. They're both as extreme as the other. The only difference is that Steve is part of an army and Red Guy leads an army, but their motivations are basically the same. The fact that this movie and all the others justify Steve's actions every single time in order to build up his hero-ness is what makes this feel like fanfiction of the wish fulfillment variety. Most people write this kind of fanfic where they are stranded on a desert island with their celebrity or literary crush. Proud Boys and Oath Keepers write fanfic where they alone can save their country from a faceless, spreading, infiltrating evil after they have been ignored or overlooked by society, where their obvious physical and tactical prowess is glorified in an officialized military setting, and where capable but subservient women melt for them at every turn. Now, all of this doesn't mean that, inherently, Captain America has a bad story. Stories can be about anything and be good so long as they are told well. As I've kind of said before, this version of Captain America, where he is allowed to be problematic if not downright villainous at times, would be really interesting over the course of a series of movies. He can mirror and parallel the real America by hitting its idealistic highs while also indulging in some of its uglier behavior we try to skim over. But that is not what we have here. What we have is bad, unexamined writing, because none of this, I think, is intentional. I think the intent was to make an unchallengingly inspirational character in kind of a throwback setting. But by not examining their writing at all, the writers have come up with something that has a lot of, shall we say, problematic aspects, which, again, isn't necessarily a problem. Except that because they go unacknowledged and unexamined within the story, they are therefore accepted by the story, if not fully endorsed. And because the characterization is so thin and the plotting so incidental, These elements are really all the story has left to be about.
So you get nothing. You lose. Good day, sir.
Because the writing is of the worst degree, Iron Man is porno for plutocrats and Captain America is propaganda for Proud Boys. It's as simple as that.
Se quer loura tem lalá, se quer morena tem lelé. E depois
Oh, don't worry, there's other ways this story sucks, and one of them is how it takes on being a war movie. As Americans, we have produced approximately 980,000 movies about World War II, which makes sense. It was a massive cataclysm which truly involved every single person in the country, whether they served in combat roles overseas, were heavily involved with the home front, or were just living their lives at the time. There were all kinds of material and scrap drives, and even if you didn't participate in those, there was rationing of everything from fuel to sugar to freaking nylons. There is no shortage of heroic true life tales to be told of valor at home or abroad. More than that, it was then and is now seen as a necessary and just war, combating the spread of fascism and the genocidal persecutions of Hitler's Nazi Party. We haven't really had a wartime situation like it since, instead engaging in proxy wars in Korea and Vietnam or wars on terror, of which we are now only beginning to realize the scope of our failure. We also haven't had something pull us together in one unifying cause as a society like the war did. The closest would probably be the coronavirus, but we've all seen how united the country has been on that front. What I'm saying is World War II has, for good reason, become one of the solid bedrocks of our national mythology. It continues to be a source of deeply meaningful narratives, be they related to combat, the Holocaust, or numerous other facets of the war. Captain America is not one of those movies. In this movie, Captain America fights Hydra, a made-up thing, not Nazis. On the one hand, I get this decision. It would feel too silly, and frankly disrespectful, if we had him running around punching people in the Battle of the Bulge or whatever. Even if it were a totally made-up battle, it would still be based in a real war that real people fought in and still resides in living memory. Saving Private Ryan is a made-up story, but also contains no fantasy elements. If Tom Hanks has super strength all of a sudden, that movie feels really gross, right? The heroics displayed in that movie and hundreds like it come from knowing they are real people performing them. Even if it's John Wayne, you know there are limits to what he can do. So I get why we see no Nazis. But having Steve fight Hydra produces basically the same effect. That is, silliness and disrespect. First, the way Hydra is characterized is as being too evil for Hitler, which is weird. It is also portrayed as something truly unstoppable, the guys we're really worried about. This devalues the real-life work done by real-life men and women in defeating the Nazis in the real world, especially when all of Hydra, the worst thing in the world, is basically completely defeated by Steve Rogers and his merry men in a montage. Why send in millions of servicemen to fight Nazis when all we need is one guy who won't take no for an answer? No, I get that Hydra is probably something from the comics, and I don't think their presence in comics in the 40s, if that was even a thing, would be an issue. During or immediately following the war, it's probably good to have parts of that war abstracted a little for readers who are children and who probably know people who were serving. But that's not what we have here. So we have to ask, is Captain America still a viable, relevant character? His role during World War II is very clear. He is essentially propaganda, or at least something to give kids hope and inspiration when the world is pretty dark. Going forward, we can see him take on more ideological issues, balancing patriotism and pride with the darker underbelly of America, like I've said. So I think he can work in either a strict World War II setting or later, depending on the story. But it seems like he is not a great fit for looking at World War II now. From our vantage point, looking back at a war we know we won, and which forms a key element of our national mythology, there's not really the need to storybook it by adding lasers and super Nazis.
Under attack by commie Nazis.
In fact, doing so hollows out the facts the mythology we are retelling is based on. But it's hard to see his character coming out of any other time in the last 75 years, not Korea and certainly not Vietnam. He doesn't make sense coming out of a post 9/11 world either. As polarizing and unpopular as wars on terror have been, it's hard to see where a figure like Captain America would fit in. He would be either unbearably naive in his idealism, an ideologue, or a tool in Dick Cheney's demented arsenal.
Sorry, I thought you were a deer.
Honestly, I would probably say that there isn't really a place for him, at least as he's portrayed here. It seems like they might be thinking about doing interesting things with the Captain America mantle, with Falcon and the Winter Soldier, but also I do not care about that show at all and haven't seen it. At least there's the possibility of some sort of thematic depth or relevance, so I wish them well, I guess.
E depois faço uma ideia, o que é que o samba dá?
Here are other things about Captain America, if you still care. 1. The technology in this movie is silly and also breaks the world of the story. We'll take the laser weapons as a given since they are powered by the blue cube. But this doesn't account for all the advanced stuff that was available before the cube's acquisition. Specifically, the red guy has a giant car that can go 200 miles per hour, tanks the size of buildings, and a one-man submersible that can cross the Atlantic. And Howard Stark has invented the hover car, even though it doesn't work. Elsewhere in the MCU, we have not seen technology that is different from what we have in the real world unless Tony Stark builds it for himself, which is different and fine. This really sticks out to me and reiterates that this is fanfic, not a real movie. 2. The laser weapons make the same charging sound as Tony's blasters. That's it. It just feels like someone should have thought of that. 3. We don't know what the Tesseract is or does. I mean, we know it's a blue cube, which apparently came from Odin's vault in Asgard somehow, and it is shown to be a source of power, which here means creating lasers which destroy matter and creating a space portal that makes the red guy go to space. The nature of this reaction is never discussed, nor the process by which the lasers are made. So it's magic. 4. Vibranium also doesn't make any sense. We are told it basically neutralizes vibration, and this apparently makes it both bullet and laser proof, which, whatever, Steve has to have a magic shield, I guess. But if it absorbs vibration, I don't know why it bounces and he can pinball it around. Like, shouldn't it just stop like the bullets do? 5. This is a small thing, but I find it very silly that Peggy decides to go along with Tommy Lee Jones when he decides to take the giant car to Steve to help him onto the airplane. Obviously, it facilitates kissing and stuff, but also feels like a weird choice for her to make in a combat zone. Like, like Tommy's like, "Okay, I'm gonna go help Captain America," and she's like, "No, let me ride in the back seat." I don't know. 6. More importantly, it feels weird that Steve has to get on the plane in the first place. I guess we are to assume that there are no available aircraft in all of Europe, Canada, and the US to shoot down the biggest airplane ever built, whose target and point of origin are both known exactly, and whose time of departure is within a known 24-hour window. Obviously, we need some kind of final confrontation between Red Guy and Steve, but this can come about just as easily if Steve kind of jumps the gun on their plan, so he's there by himself, so he has to improvise. As it is, it kind of feels like Steve getting on the plane was the plan the whole time, or that they are surprised that the plane was able to take off. 7. We see the flight of the plane in its entirety, in real time. At least, we don't have any obvious lapses in time, like Steve getting knocked out or something. He jumps on the plane, sneaks to the hold where the mini plane pilots are already getting ready to launch. He fights them, crashes back into the big plane, fights Red Guy, then downs the big plane. This all takes less than 10 minutes. Now, it is approximately 4,000 miles from the Alps to New York. They do not make it to New York, but do make it to somewhere Arctic, but also somehow imminently close to New York. The geography doesn't make sense, but let's say Arctic Canada, since there's permanent ice and ocean there. Coincidentally, this is also probably the same distance away. Now, to travel 4,000 miles in 10 minutes would require a constant speed of approximately 24,000 miles per hour, or Mach 31, which is apparently in excess of re-entry speed from orbit. For reference, if the plane were to travel at just Mach 1, the plane would travel only about 125 miles, barely getting them to German airspace. This is stupid. 8. The scene the movie closes on, set in future times, really needs to be the post-credits scene. I have a feeling it was probably designed to be in the first place, but then for some reason someone at Marvel was like, you know what would be better than an engaging, twisty, kind of sad scene in the post-credits? With just a crappy short trailer. As it is now, the scene undercuts whatever emotional resonance was lingering from Steve's apparent sacrifice. The time jump has a poignancy in itself as Steve takes in what's going on, but that poignancy has nothing to do with any of the themes of the movie. 9. Steve chooses to dress like this, and if that isn't an indication of an outsized sense of self-importance and vanity, I don't know what is. And here, at last, I think that's it. If you still couldn't tell, I think this is an extraordinarily flawed movie. At a basic story level, it has some pretty critical failings, in that our protagonist is never given any meaningful characterization, and so therefore cannot grow or develop. The plot, too, cannot really engage him since he is a constant throughout. It's really hard to make a meaningful story with a flat, static main character. These failings of story mean that what we do have is a Captain America that reads like a recruitment ad for a certain kind of extremist patriot, and who actively devalues the courage and heroics he thinks he is extolling. This is a garbage movie for a garbage character, and it only gets worse for him from here. And the only reason for this is that the story has gone totally unexamined by its creators. Or, they did identify issues like what I've pointed out and did nothing to correct them, which is essentially the same thing. I know that Proud Boys and Oath Keepers weren't a thing when this movie was made, but the impulse they represent has been festering since well before 9/11, and indeed led to the worst aspects of our response to that catastrophe. If you're tasked with creating a story for a mass audience that will include children who will want to idolize the heroic character you are portraying, you gotta be a little more responsible than that. Anyway, join me next time when we'll be finally getting to the Avengers, the greatest cinematic achievement of all time. Good night.
Mrs. Donner wanted to go along, naturally, but Donner said,
Your wussiness better come in handy.